Hello. It is with a heavy heart that I come before you all tonight. This is Editor Nick, extending a heartfelt apology. The video file that proves I'm in fact a real-life human being with hopes and dreams and schemes of my own that help to make my tutorials more relatable has been brutally corrupted by the dark forces at work in this world. Now, I come before you not as the writer, not as the on-camera talent. No. Tonight I come before you simply as the video editor to extend an apology for as much as it bothers me to interrupt my editing routine, which consists of sitting outside in the gorgeous Florida weather, just smoking a stick and letting that nicotine buzz keep me focused and attentive. But it hurts me even more to know that I'm depriving you of the top-notch quality that you've come to expect from this channel. So please, enjoy this tutorial anyways, and know that this is not a start of a new trend. And by the way, less than half you jackals watching this are even subbed to the channel, so do us all a favor and hit that sub button. Let's go.
Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to be continuing our stacking lessons by going over some of the basics of player stacking. Specifically, you'll define your own set of players that you want to stack, not just the team in general, but give you a little more control over who we're stacking throughout our lineups. So yeah, we're just going to hop right in and get to it. So, first things first, we are going to run our import statements, and notice this time we're importing players group. Capital P, capital G, one word, and that's going to be the module or the function that we're going to be using to define our groups that we're making to feed into the optimizer. And bring in our player list, and again, that is the exact same player list we were using in our team stacking video. So if you already have a copy of that handy, it's going to be the exact same player set, but again, you can mix and match players however you want for the purposes of the tutorial. These are just the ones that I'm using today. So go ahead, define our optimizer. Go ahead and run first 10 lineups again for our control group so we can kind of see the players that are getting picked, so we can pick some good ones to use as examples for our stacking. Going to be the exact same control group we had for team stacking, so we should all be pretty familiar with this. No surprises there. So first thing we're going to do is if we want to stack a subset of players on every lineup. Let's say you're doing a relatively small entry limit tournament, you got 10 entries, and you are just, all chips, all in. We're going big on 2 or 3 players as our core and building around that. It's going to be pretty simple. It's going to be very similar to what we did for our team stacking. First, we're going to define our player group. You can call it whatever you want. I just did group 1, make it easy. But you could name this, Boston stack, Cleveland stack, Golden State stack, and specify the players you're wanting to stack from that team, or it could be players on different teams too. It doesn't have to be the same team, but to keep it easy, we're going to show Josh Richardson and Grant Williams from the Celtics stack because they're players that aren't being utilized a whole bunch in our control group here. I think there might be one Josh Richardson lineup in here, or maybe a Grant Williams, maybe going once, going twice. Bueller. Alright, so maybe there's none at all. Or I missed it. Either way, not important. So we're defining this group, and we're going to use players group, optimizer player pool, get players, Josh Richardson, Grant Williams. That is the players group that we're importing up here. Simple enough so far. We will define our group. We will add our player group to the optimizer, and then we just have to pass the group that we created there. And then we're going to run our optimizer again. And note, we have no exposure set here. So in theory, every single lineup should have Josh Richardson and Grant Williams, because this is a group stack that we have. So let's take a look. And we have Josh Richardson, Grant Williams, Josh Richardson, Williams. Yep. Alright, so it looks like we've got Josh Richardson and Grant Williams on every lineup. Kudos for us. However, you'll notice that these lineups are not very high scores. Top one's 299. Our top one here was 312.99. Okay. So obviously, you know, Josh Richardson and Grant Williams probably aren't the players you're looking to stack. But we have now shown that we can pick two players that normally would not have been in a single lineup, and now they are in every lineup, just by passing that group with no exposures. So that solves our problem of how to stack specific players. Next up, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to have some exposure set to it. So now in theory, we only have two players here, and we're stacking them both at the same time. So that should mean we have 20% exposure to this stack specifically. Now, what that means, it doesn't mean that Josh Richardson and or Grant Williams will only be on two lineups. Like we'll use that stack 2 times, and then it's just putting it out open to the open market, making the lineups. So if these players were showing up on our control group lineups, they would still start showing up on those again, because this is not a player exposure, okay? This is the exposure set to the stacks we're forcing, all right? So we're going to get 2 stacks, and then it's going to be open season, and it should be very similar to what our control group looked like after those top 2 stacks. So we'll see Josh Richardson, we'll see Grant Williams, Josh Richardson, Grant Williams, and now I bet in the lineup number 3 is going to be 312.99 points. Would you look at that? We're right back to where we started. Now just to show here, let me take a look at our control group again and see if we can find a good one to use. Brunson, DeRozan, Brunson, DeRozan, Brunson. Okay, we're going to do Jalen Brunson and DeMar DeRozan. That's going to be perfect, because they show up together at least 3 times. Maybe more, maybe not more. Yep, so they show up more than 2 times together. So let's go ahead and plug them in. We'll just go ahead and comment that out for now. And then, whoop, that's not what I wanted to do. We're going to do, who did I say? Jalen Brunson and DeMar DeRozan. I believe that's who I said. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. So now we're passing this stack at 20% exposure. Now we're going to see if it will limit it so those 2 players can only be on a lineup 20% of the time, or if it's only forcing the stack 20% of the time. Because we had at least 3, I believe 4 lineups in our control group set of 10 that featured both of these players. So let's see what that ends up in. So we have our Brunson and DeRozan, Brunson and DeRozan. So there's our 2 force stacks, okay? Now let's go down a little bit. DeRozan, no Brunson. DeRozan, no Brunson. Neither of them. DeRozan, no Brunson. DeRozan, no Brunson. Nope. We may be in the clear. Brunson, no DeRozan. Okay, so it does. It will only allow that specific combination to appear on 20% of our lineups. So that will, in effect, well, I guess no, it's not showing a player exposure, because you're having these players individually. They just won't be together. Okay, so that's important to know. It will not, just like when we did our team stack, where we could end up with a stack beyond the exposure. It just wouldn't be forced. Here it will not allow those 2 players to be on the same lineup on more than 20% of our lineups. So we've got that cleared up. Let's go ahead and move on. And now we have another function here that's a little more advanced, but we're going to go ahead and touch on it, where we can specify a group of players, and we can say, rather than we're wanting to stack these players, we can say we only want at most 1 of them on every lineup. So we come back up here to our control group. We see Brunson right here, Luka Doncic, Jalen Brunson. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, we're actually going to use our DeMar DeRozan, Jalen Brunson, because we know they show up on 4 lineups together on the control group. So we're going to go ahead and swap them buddies out. So in theory, what we're saying here is we want to pay special attention to these 2 players. We want them. We want them on our lineups, but we want only 1 of them. No more than 1. So Jalen Brunson and Luka Doncic is a good example because you're probably only wanting one of those players on your lineup, right? You don't want Luka and Jalen because Jalen is Luka's backup. So you want Luka. If Luka's out, you want Jalen. Or if you think Luka is going to be riding the bench because it's going to be a blowout and Jalen's going to get all the minutes, whatever the case may be, you probably only want one of them. Kind of like LeBron and AD, right? Either one of them could blow the barn doors open any game. The odds of both of them doing that are very slim, though. There's only so many points to be scored. There's only so many rebounds to be had in a game. So one of them will probably be leading the team. One of them will probably not. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. You might only want one of them on a lineup. Trae Young, John Collins. Maybe you only want one of them on a lineup. So it just depends. You may have a situation like that where you want to limit that exposure. So if we run that with max from group equals 1 instead of the exposure set, we should never see these two on the same lineup. So we have DeRozan, no Brunson. DeRozan, no Brunson. Neither of them. Okay, so again, this is not saying we have to have one of them on every lineup. It is just saying at most we only want one of them. So it's not an exactly one, it's an at most one. So there's a DeRozan, 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 DeRozan. Brunson, there we go. Brunson, no DeRozan. DeRozan, no Brunson. So on and so forth. You get the picture. So that's what we're going for there, is if we're wanting to limit the combinations of specific players. And you could have, you could throw 5 players in here and say you want max 2 of them, right? So if you wanted to make sure, like if you run your control group, right, you run this, or maybe just your basic exposure set, you run it, and you realize you're getting like 4 players from one team on several lineups just because they're projected very high and they're cheap. Because remember, the optimizer by itself is just looking at the math. How many points are projected, how much they cost, what position they are, give me the best lineups. Logic beyond that, it can only implement if you tell it so. So it's never going to say, you know what, I have 5 Cleveland players on this roster. That's probably not good. It's never going to notice that. It's never going to notice the projections were off on some guy riding the bench because his fantasy points per minute you had really high because he's played 3 minutes and had 6 points. And now he's projected more minutes because someone's out. It's not going to see those things and know that. So that's up to you to make sure that you are relaying those rules and that logic to the optimizer. So this is a prime example. It's not going to realize that you don't want, and again, Jalen and Luke is a better example because Jalen and DeMar have no connection to each other as far as roster construction goes, different teams. But you have to be able to let the optimizer know that so it can make better choices. But again, recapping, we're adding the stack the same way, but it's not a stack, it's an anti-stack. We're saying we don't want to stack these guys. We only want one of them. And that's that. And just to show you how else we could do it, we got James Harden on a couple of them. We can go ahead and throw Harden in here. Reset our optimizer. Now out of these 3 players, we're only going to have one of them, Harden, DeRozan, and Brunson. So this one's Harden, no DeRozan or Brunson. This one's DeRozan, no Harden or Brunson. This one's DeRozan, no Harden or Brunson. DeRozan, no Harden or Brunson. So DeRozan's very much so the best value here because he's the one that the optimizer's picking. In other words, Harden is not projected to have an output worthy of his price if you're forcing to pivot off of DeRozan and Brunson for their values. So it's deciding that DeRozan is the better choice, and you can make up I just looked at Russell Westbrook. You can make up the Harden points elsewhere with those savings. But that's interesting. You see, now we don't have Harden on a single lineup, was it? We have one lineup with Harden. That's it. So now you may be thinking, what if I want 2 different sets of player stacks? And I want each of them a different exposure and I want to run the optimizer and say I want one of these two stacks to be used on 30% of my lineups or whatever that is. So what we've done so far, and this would be my first style, this is the first way I tried to do it. You would have, you define your group 1, Trae Young, DeMar DeRozan, max exposure 0.3. You define your group 2, James Harden, Jalen Brunson, max exposure 0.3. And then you just add your player group 1, add your player group 2, and run with it. But you'll notice some goofy things are going to happen. You're going to start out, and it's going to be looking okay. Brunson and Harden, okay. And again, we've having DeRozan in the other stack does not mean you can't have him. But wait a minute, we have Trae Young, Jalen Brunson, James Harden, and DeMar DeRozan, all of them in one. Okay, that's interesting. That's not what I would expect there. And that's not our top scoring control group lineup, so we know it's not just doing that. So it's putting all of them together. Then moving down to the next one, we have Jalen Brunson, Trae Young, DeMar DeRozan, James Harden. That would be all of them again for lineup number 2. And Brunson, Young, Harden, DeRozan, all of them again for lineup number 3. Interesting. So we've hit 30%, and we've used each of them 3 times because both groups have been on all 3 lineups. So it's like a 4. Brunson, DeRozan. Okay. Well, that, those guys are in different stacks. So now we're clear. Let's check the score. 308, 308, 308, 312. Okay. Now we're back up here at 312.49. So it's trying to almost like force different combinations of these players is what it looks like to me going through here. Because then we have Brunson DeRozan, then we have DeRozan Brunson, DeRozan Harden, Harden DeRozan, Harden Young, Brunson DeRozan, right? Like it's trying to like create different combinations of that stack, and that's not what we wanted. We wanted 3 up to 3 Trae Young, DeMar DeRozan stacks and up to 3 James Harden, Jalen Brunson stacks. That is what we thought we were doing here, but that's not how you do that in the lineup optimizer. How you do that is going to be with the stack function. So we will have a new import statement from pydfs-lineup-optimizer import stack. That you can just have right up here. And again, you can add all of this into one import statement because they're all coming from the same module. I just have them separated out because they're new and I want to make sure we see them. We call our new optimizer. We still define our 2 groups the exact same way. And we'll go ahead and do 0.3.3 again, so we make sure we do it all the same. But now we're going to do optimizer add stack, and then the stack function we imported, and then we're going to pass a list of the groups that we've defined. So now we're passing the list, groups 1 and 2. And again, even if you're only passing 1, which we wouldn't need to do in this scenario, but if this is how you wanted to add your stacks, so you can do it the same way each time. If you're passing 1, you still need to pass a list, okay? So we pass that, we add the stack of group 1 and group 2 at 30% exposure each, and now we run our lineup creation tool, and you can see we have Brunson Harden. Now DeRozan does show up there, but not with Trae Young, because we don't have any player exposures. If we have player exposures set, then it would likely be holding out to make sure it's getting the 30% of the stack first, and then it's going to look at the player exposure. So look at the next lineup. Brunson Harden again, and DeRozan does pop up there, but he's not in a stack with Trae Young. We have now Trae Young DeRozan. Trae Young DeRozan. Harden shows up there. Not a big deal though. That's not the Harden Brunson stack. Then we have Brunson Harden for number 3, and Trae Young and DeRozan for number 3 there, and you can see Jalen Brunson sneaking in. And then we're right back out to the beginning. No stacking. Just give me the best lineups because we used up all 6 of our stacks there. Now what would be interesting is seeing how this behaves, because we see how many times these players end up within the other one stack. If we do max exposure equals 0.3 for the players as a whole, let's see what happens. Okay, so we still have DeRozan showing up on the Brunson Harden stack. That's interesting. We have Brunson Harden, DeRozan showing up again, so that would mean that we should only get one DeRozan Trae Young stack, because we've already used DeRozan 2 times. If, as we're going to find out, which of these overrides the other. So we have 1, 2, then we have a Trae Young DeRozan, so we shouldn't see another Trae Young DeRozan. Oh, and look at this here. Can't generate lineups. Yep. So you'll want to watch out there. And we'll get, when we get into some more advanced measures, we'll see some ways that we can avoid doing this in the future. But let's see if we just bump it up to 0.5, if that'll let it run. Yep, okay. So let's take a look. So that should be enough to get DeRozan on the 2 Brunson Harden stacks that he was on, and then Young DeRozan 1, Young DeRozan 2, Brunson Harden again, Young DeRozan 3. So that was enough to let him be on both of those and then still show up for his 3 stacks. But we did get an error when we ran it with the max exposure of 0.3. So that's something you'll need to watch out for and kind of really think about how you're running these, and that's why I think it's so important to run your control group first, so you can see the players that are getting taken and at what rate. Because if they're getting picked a lot here, they're probably going to continue to get picked a lot outside of the stacks you're defining. But that's going to be it for the basics of, oh, and look, we still, yeah. So that's the error that we get with the 0.3, which we already saw. So that's going to be it for the basics of player stacking. You've got all the basic tools there. You can plug in a stack. You do start to run into some limitations when you're doing multiple player stacks with set exposures and putting a player exposure on top of that, because you might have instances where you run into problems like this. So to be careful, play around with it some. We'll get into some more advanced techniques going forward, and I'll look into figuring out a way to avoid doing this that we'd be able to implement kind of across the board. If you have any ideas on or how you handle things like that in your own, go ahead, drop a comment below. Let's get some discussion going on it. But that's going to be it for this topic today. Major thank you and shout out to everyone on the Patreon. Love the support I get from you guys. Love the interaction we have on the Discord there. Get the early access to the videos, all that jazz, and hoorah. If you're looking to get in, $5 a month, pretty cheap. Come hang out in the Discord. And that's going to be about it. We've got some advanced stacking techniques videos coming up. We have some late swap videos coming up. I know I mentioned the last one, the late swap video is a little harder for me to make because I can only make it during certain times when late swapping would be applicable. We're getting there. It's definitely coming. Just have to sit down and make sure I can carve some time out to do it at that time of day. But yeah, that's it. That's coming. We'll get into kind of do some more lineup stuff, then we'll get back into more model building stuff, and we'll just kind of bounce around back and forth so we're not just, you know, hammering one thing for too long, getting everybody bored with it. So with all that said, done rambling. Thank you guys for the support, and I'll see you next time.